There is a woman standing in a driveway in Connecticut in a $1,000 blazer. And she is losing everything she built. Not loudly, not the way things fall apart in movies, quietly, the way a fence post rots from the inside solid on the surface. Nothing left at the core. 11 years, a company, a daughter she raised in the margins of board meetings and investor calls, and every decision that cost her sleep. Gone. And then a truck pulls through the gate. Not a sleek car, not a lawyer, not anyone who was supposed to save anything. A work truck, dented, a cartoon sticker on the thermos in the cup holder. A man who burns his hand on the coffee pot every morning and keeps moving, because stopping was never an option he was given. He is not here to save her. He is here to fix a fence. Except the fence was already broken long before the truck ever touched it, and so was everything else. The morning it started, Stephen Taylor burned his hand on the coffee pot. Not badly. Just enough to matter. He was pouring one-handed into a thermos, because his other hand was already holding a lunchbox, his keys, his phone with 3 unread texts from a contractor who owed him $400 and kept finding reasons not to pay. The pot slipped. Hot water caught the side of his palm. He hissed, set the pot down, ran cold water for 30 seconds, then kept moving. Because that was the thing about Stephen's life. You kept moving. You didn't have the option of stopping in the middle of the kitchen and letting the burn be what it was. There was a 20-year-old kid down the hall who'd driven home from college last night and would want breakfast before heading back. There was a truck that needed to leave by 6:15. There was a job site that had been slow this month in the particular way that slow meant the kind where you did math in your head at 2 in the morning, dividing numbers you already knew and not liking what they said. He wrapped his hand in a dish towel, started the eggs, called down the hallway twice. Brandon appeared on the second call, 19 years old technically, but something in the way he moved deliberate, unhurried, reading the room before he said a word made him seem older. He dropped into the kitchen chair the way he always did, backpack still on one shoulder, hair sideways, and took exactly 4 seconds to clock the dish towel. Stephen's chest tightened. You burned your hand. I'm fine. You're using the dish towel. Brandon set his backpack on the floor with practiced quiet. You only use the dish towel when you don't want me to see. Stephen looked at his son, his mother's eyes, his father's refusal to be fooled, which was flattering and exhausting in roughly equal measure. Eat your eggs. Brandon ate his eggs. He watched his father move around the kitchen with the calm, unhurried attention of someone who had spent 19 years learning that his father's silences were a language. He'd gotten fluent in it early. Too early, probably, but here they were. The call came at 6:11, unknown number, Whitfield Hollow area code. Stephen almost sent it to voicemail. He was loading the truck thermos under one arm, top half folded over the tailgate, burned hand throbbing slightly under the work glove he'd pulled on. He answered anyway, because not answering felt like hiding, and Stephen Taylor didn't hide from phone calls. Is this Taylor Repairs? The voice on the other end was controlled in a way that took effort. He could hear the effort underneath it, the same way you hear someone holding their breath when they're trying to sound calm. It is. My name is Catherine Hill. I need a fence repaired, possibly replaced. 2 contractors have already looked at it. Both said it was outside their scope. A pause, precise and intentional. I need someone who can actually assess it and give me a number today. Not next week. Today. What happened to it? A delivery truck took the corner too wide on my easement road 2 weeks ago. The driver's insurance is disputing liability. I have a property line issue that my attorney says could become complicated if the fence stays down. Another pause. I need it fixed. When do you need me there? Now would be ideal. 8 is acceptable. He checked the time. 6:11. Whitfield Hollow was 40 minutes away. I can do 8. I'll need to see it before I give you a number. Obviously. And then half a second, almost too brief to catch. Thank you. She hung up. Stephen finished loading the truck, watched Brandon's taillights disappear down the street. Then he drove toward Whitfield Hollow and did not think about the controlled voice on the phone or the effort underneath it. He thought about the job. He thought about what a fence looked like, after a delivery truck hit it at an angle. He thought about whether the area code meant money, and whether money meant the kind of client who'd add scope every other day, and whether he had the bandwidth for that this month. He did not. But he'd figure that out when he got there. The gate was open when he pulled in. He didn't go to the house first. That wasn't how he worked. He went to the fence, and the fence was worse than a truck clipping a corner. 30 feet of the east property line had partially collapsed. 3 posts were leaning badly. Concrete footings cracked underneath. The wire mesh had torn and folded back on itself in a way that looked almost violent. Somewhere in the middle of all of it, someone had already tried zip-tying part of it back together, a temporary fix that had made everything slightly worse. Because temporary fixes applied to the wrong problem always made things worse. That was basically a law. But it was what he found at the base of the posts that changed his understanding of the job. He crouched, pressed his fingers against the wood at the second post, right at the ground line. The wood gave. Not dramatically. Just enough. He pressed harder. It gave more. There was rot in there, not new rot, not truck-related rot. This was old. This post had been struggling before the truck ever touched it. He stood, walked 6 feet down the line, crouched again at the third post. Same thing, maybe worse. He made a note, made another note, stood up and looked at the whole line from the end. The way you look at something when you want to see it as a system, instead of a problem. You're not the man I called. He didn't turn around. He finished what he was looking at, finished the note, then straightened and turned. Catherine Hill was not what he'd expected. He couldn't have said exactly what he'd expected, but not this. She was in her mid-40s, tall, with dark brown hair pulled back in a way that was polished without being fussy. Charcoal blazer, phone in hand. She was looking at him the way you look at a flight that has landed in the wrong city, not angry, exactly. More like recalculating. Paul Moore subcontracts overflow to me when he's booked. Stephen kept his voice even. He's booked. I called Paul specifically. I know. I can do the job Paul would have done. He paused. And I'll be honest with you in a way that Paul sometimes isn't. Her eyes sharpened, not hostile. Just paying attention now. What does that mean? It means this fence had problems before that truck hit it. 2 of these posts were already rotting at the base. Whoever inspected them last either didn't look carefully or didn't want to tell you what they found. He held her gaze. I'll tell you what I find, even if it costs more than what you want to hear. A pause that lasted long enough to have weight. Come to the house at 8:30, Catherine said. I'll hear the number then. She turned and walked back across the gravel toward the house, heels precise on the uneven surface. Not hurrying, just done with the conversation. Stephen went back to the posts. He spent the next 45 minutes reading the fence, the way he'd learned to read everything slowly, from the ground up, without deciding what he thought. Before he knew what he was looking at, he pressed. He measured. He checked sight lines. He found 2 more posts with rot that wasn't visible from the outside, and 1 section of footing that had heaved slightly, over at least 2 winters, which meant the drainage underneath was compromised, which meant he'd be replacing more than originally visible. He wrote it all down. He didn't editorialize. He just wrote down what was there. At 8:20, he walked to the front door. The number he brought was fair. He knew it was fair the way you know when you've been honest, not generous, not padded, just accurate. And the moment Catherine looked at it, he could tell she knew it too. Because her expression did not do what expressions do when people are looking for room to negotiate. She studied the paper. She looked up. This is lower than the estimates I already received. The other estimates probably included contingency padding. I price what I see. If I find something I didn't expect, I call you before I touch it. He met her eyes. You decide how to proceed. I don't run the meter while you're deciding. Something crossed her face. Not quite suspicion. More like recalibrating again. Why not? And it was a real question. Not skeptical, genuinely wanting to know. Because that's not how I'd want to be treated. She looked at him for a moment that lasted slightly longer than a business moment usually does. Then, start today. Something shifted in her expression just briefly, just at the edges. Not quite a smile. The shape of one, Do you need anything from the house? Spigot access, south side. She handed back the paper and went inside. He was setting the first new footing at 11:40 when Ashley appeared. She came around the corner of the house with the particular energy of someone who had been watching for a while and finally decided to stop pretending otherwise. 19, maybe brown eyes like her mother's, but the edges still unguarded in a way Catherine's weren't. She moved with the easy confidence of someone who had grown up in spaces like this without becoming defined by them. You pulled all 3 posts. Not a question, just observing. The third one looked fine from the outside. Stephen kept working. It wasn't. She came closer, stopped at a reasonable distance. How do you know when you can't see it? He gestured toward the removed post lying on the ground 6 feet away. Put your hand on the wood at the base. Press in. She didn't hesitate. She walked over, crouched down, pressed her palm flat against the old post at the ground line. The wood gave under her hand. She pulled her hand back, looked at it, then looked up. Oh, things that look solid aren't always solid. He poured the mix, checked the level. And things that look damaged aren't always as damaged as they seem. She heard something in that. He could see her hear it, a small internal shift like a key turning. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, I'm Ashley. Stephen. A beat. Then, do you want a sandwich? I made 3. There are only 2 of us for lunch, and my mother doesn't eat enough when she's on calls. He had a lunch in the truck. He'd packed one himself, the same way he always did, because you did not put yourself in the position of needing something from the person you were working for. It was a rule he'd made and kept for 15 years. Sure, he said. She came back with turkey on sourdough, a glass of water with ice, and a folded napkin underneath the plate, handed them to him like it was completely natural, like she'd been feeding people working in her yard her whole life. He ate standing. She stayed nearby, not hovering, just present. You have a kid, she said. Not a question. He looked up from the sandwich. She pointed at his thermos. The sticker on the side, a cartoon creeper from some video game, applied 3 months ago with a tongue pressed between 2 teeth and the concentration of someone doing something permanent and happy about it. Brandon had pressed it on the morning after Stephen told him he'd made the dean's list, an announcement that required exactly no fanfare, apparently, except a sticker placed with great deliberation on the most frequently visible object in the house. Stephen had never taken it off. A son, he said. He's 19, college, Connecticut State. He comes with me on jobs sometimes. Shorter ones, weekends. Ashley looked at the fence. The silence was easy in the way silences are easy between people who are both comfortable not filling them. Then, my mom used to bring me with her. She paused. To the office, when my dad first left and she didn't want me with a sitter. I used to sit in the conference room and draw. She'd come check on me between meetings. A pause that had something careful in it. Every 40 minutes exactly. Stephen was quiet. She stopped bringing me, Ashley said, when she decided I was old enough to stay alone. Her voice didn't change. That was the thing. It just didn't change. I was 14, he looked at her. She was looking at the fence. 14 is old enough for some things, he said carefully. Not everything. No, he handed her the empty plate. Not everything. At 1:15, he heard Catherine's voice through the open kitchen window. Not words, tone. The controlled, precise tone of a woman receiving information she does not want and processing it in real time without allowing herself the reaction she's having. He recognized it the same way you recognize a smell that brings you somewhere specific, immediate, involuntary. A little like a fist around the chest. He had used that exact tone in hospital corridors 4 years ago, answering doctors' questions clearly, keeping his voice steady. Because there was a 15-year-old boy in the next room who was already frightened enough for both of them. I understand. No. I understand completely. Thank you for telling me directly. A pause. Long. Heavy. Then quieter. Yes, I'll be in touch. He kept working. He mixed concrete. Checked levels. He gave her voice, all the privacy a wall couldn't quite give, by keeping his hands moving and his attention forward and not being the kind of person who made someone else's worst moment into their own. 15 minutes later, the back door opened. Catherine walked out across the yard, toward the far edge, where the fence line had been, and stopped, arms crossed, jaw set. She was not on her phone, she was not doing anything at all. Just standing in the posture of a person who has made a decision not to break and is holding that decision in place with sheer quiet will. Stephen kept working, didn't look up, gave her the moment. Gave her 2 minutes worth of moment, which he knew because he was timing a pour. Then, without looking up, "There's a post that needs someone to hold it steady while I check the angle. If you've got a minute." A silence. Her voice from across the yard, "I'm not dressed for this. You're just holding it still. You don't have to dig anything." Another pause, shorter. Then he heard heels on grass, deliberate, careful, each step chosen. She came and stood where he indicated. And when she wrapped both hands around the post, she did it with the grip of someone who had decided to do the thing completely or not at all. He checked the angle. Level in one direction. Off by a 1/4 inch in the other. He adjusted. Checked again, level, he said. She let go, stepped back, looked at her hands, concrete dust across both palms. "I don't usually do this kind of work," she said. "I know." She looked at him. Something in the look had shifted slightly from how she'd looked at him at 8:30. Still measuring, but differently. "Does it bother you when people say that?" He considered it honestly. Not as a polite performance. Actually thought about it. "No," he said. "Everyone's got their own kind of work. I just know mine." She held the look a moment longer. Then, quietly, not explaining, not leading anywhere. "The call," he waited. "The board of directors is removing me from my own company." Her voice was even. Almost. "Constructive dismissal, they're calling it, which is a legal term for." She stopped, exhaled through her nose. "They found a way to make me want to leave. And you don't want to leave. I built that company for 11 years. Something went sharp in her voice. Not sharp like anger, sharp like something that has been held under pressure, long enough to cut. "I started it in my second bedroom, with a laptop and a phone and a daughter who didn't sleep through the night." She stopped. The sentence ended somewhere she hadn't planned to go. Stephen didn't say "I'm sorry." He'd learned that "I'm sorry" was sometimes just something people said to close a door, to move the conversation toward the exit. It didn't help. It just signaled that the person saying it was ready to move on. Instead, he said, "And Ashley." Catherine turned her head. "She's been watching you through that window for the last hour." Catherine looked at the house, through the kitchen window, partially visible, not quite hidden the shape of Ashley. Not spying, just near. The way kids are near when they sense their parent is carrying something and haven't been taught yet that adults call that presence. Something unwelcome. Something in Catherine's expression changed. Not dramatic, but real. The jaw was still set. The eyes did something different. Something shifted the way ice changes in late February. Not breaking, just becoming something slightly less rigid. "She doesn't need to worry about this. She already is." Stephen picked up his level. Worrying alone is harder than worrying with someone. Catherine looked at him directly. "Do you speak from experience?" He met her eyes, every day. She held the look for one more second, then turned and walked back toward the house. And he watched her go with the particular attention of someone cataloging something they didn't expect to be cataloging. He went back to the posts. Brandon arrived at 4:10. He pulled up in the used Civic that Stephen had helped him buy in August, got out with the easy, purposeful stride of a kid who had somewhere to be and knew how to get there. He assessed the fence in approximately 4 seconds, the posts, the angles, the mesh, the work remaining with the calm confidence of someone who had watched this work, done enough times to have genuine opinions about it. 2.5 footings today, not a criticism, just accounting. The last one needs more time on the mix. Stephen kept working. "It's not ready. You should have started earlier." "I started at 8. Earlier than 8. Brandon watched his father's hands. Precise, unhurried. "You do better work when you have more time." Stephen looked at his son. Inside that statement is a lesson you'll understand when you have your own business. Brandon thought about that, decided it was probably true. Let it go. Then the back door opened. Catherine came out, and she stopped when she saw Brandon the way some adults stop when they see children they weren't expecting. surprised by the specific reality of a person they'd only abstracted. She looked at him with an openness she hadn't shown Stephen all day. Something unguarded in it. Brandon looked back, polite. "Your fence was already struggling before the truck hit it." He said it matter-of-factly, the way he said most things. "My dad doesn't just fix the new damage. He goes back to where the problem actually started." The silence that followed lasted 4 full seconds. Catherine looked at Stephen. Stephen was checking something that didn't need checking. He could feel both of them looking at him, and he kept his eyes on the level. Because some moments you let pass through the space between people without grabbing at them. "He's right," Catherine said. It was. She looked back at Brandon. "Would you like something to eat?" Ashley's inside. She's been looking for someone to argue with about calculus. Brandon's face did something immediate and delighted. "I argue about calculus. I gather." He walked toward the house, like it was a place he'd been before, that specific, open-heart confidence of a kid who hasn't yet learned to be cautious about belonging somewhere new. Catherine watched him go. Then she looked at Stephen, and the look on her face was something he recognized, in the way you recognize something you haven't seen in a long time and didn't realize you'd missed. She was seeing him. Not the estimate, not the work order, not the person standing on her property. Him. "He goes back to where the problem actually started," she said softly. Not to anyone, really. Just turning the words over, hearing what they weighed. Stephen cleared his throat. "I'll be back at 6:30 tomorrow morning. Pour the last footing before the temperature drops." 6:30, she said. Like she was writing it somewhere she'd remember. He packed his tools. He went to the kitchen door and collected his son, who was in the middle of what appeared to be a deeply satisfying disagreement with Ashley about whether implicit differentiation made calculus more elegant or just more dishonest. Stephen said goodbye. Catherine said thank you for today. He said I didn't finish. She said I know. I'm not talking about the fence. He left. He drove home in the thickness of the early dark, with Brandon in the passenger seat, asleep inside 12 minutes, head against the window, some unfinished thought still on his face. Stephen drove and did not think about Catherine Hill. He did not think about the way she'd gripped the post like she'd decided to do the thing completely. He did not think about 11 years and a second bedroom and a daughter who didn't sleep through the night. He did not think about the specific quality of her voice on the phone, at 1:15, controlled and precise and working very hard to stay that way. He thought about the fence. He thought about the third post, the one that looked solid from the outside, the one that gave when you pressed it. He thought about how easy it was to drive past something like that. Accept the surface, not press, not check. Just move on because from the outside everything looked fine and you had places to be. He merged onto the highway. The engine hummed. Brandon breathed. The burned place on his palm, the one from the coffee pot at 6 in the morning, had stopped, hurting somewhere around noon without him noticing. It occurred to him somewhere between exit 7 and exit 8 that he could not remember the last time something had stopped hurting without him having to work at it. He drove. The dark came in around the truck, and he did not think about Catherine Hill. He thought about the Colt, the third one, the one that looked solid. He thought about how the whole skill of this work, the whole discipline of it, was learning not to trust the outside. Was learning that the outside tells you what something wants you to see. The inside tells you what's actually there, and those two things are sometimes the same, and sometimes so different, it'll catch you off guard, even after 20 years. He thought about that. He took exit 8, made the left, past the gas station and the Methodist church and the Methodists and the elementary school where Brandon had attended for 6 years, and where Stephen had stood in the parking lot one October afternoon with a doctor's voice still in his ear, watching kids stream out the front doors, and found his son immediately in the crowd, found him the way you find someone when you suddenly understand in your body how it would feel to lose them. He didn't think about that, either. He thought about the third post. Brandon woke up when they turned onto their street, sat up, looked out the window, said nothing for a moment, which was its own kind of comment on the fact that his father had been quiet the whole drive. And, they both knew it, and neither of them needed to say so. Then the girl, Ashley. Stephen kept his eyes on the road. What about her? She's smart, not just academically. A pause. She said her mom built that company by herself. She did. Is the company in trouble? The company's fine, Stephen said. The people around the company are the trouble. Brandon was quiet for a moment. Working on that. Then, that's usually how it goes, right? Stephen pulled into the driveway, killed the engine, sat for a second with his hands on the wheel in the dark. Yeah, he said, that's usually how it goes. They went inside. Stephen made soup. Brandon talked about school, something about a professor who'd given the entire class the same feedback in different fonts. Like he thought that made it individualized, which Brandon found philosophically offensive. Stephen listened and made the right sounds and ate his soup. And later, when Brandon was watching something on his laptop with headphones in, Stephen sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and did not look at his phone and did not think about Catherine Hill. He thought about Linda. He thought about the way Linda used to say that the best thing about him, and also sometimes the most frustrating thing, was that he showed up. That he showed up before you knew you needed him and stayed after everyone else had already left. That he couldn't help it. That it was in him the same way. Certain materials have load-bearing properties that aren't obvious from the outside, but that determine what they can sustain and what will eventually give. She had said that. And he had said, that's just doing the job. And she had said, that's what I mean. You think that's just the job. It's the whole thing. It's the whole of you. He had not known what to do with that when she said it. He had nodded and changed the subject and spent approximately 3 years not understanding what she'd been pointing at. He understood now. He drank the coffee. It had gone lukewarm while he wasn't paying attention. He sat with it anyway. Outside, the night was clear and cold, and somewhere 40 minutes away, along a property line in Whitfield Hollow, a fence was half finished, leaning into the summer now, dark with its last post not yet set, waiting for someone to come back and do the next right thing, which he would, at 6:30, or slightly before, because that was how he worked. Word count 3,196, wait running recount before finalizing. The morning it started, Stephen Taylor burned his hand on the coffee pot, full text rendered above. Running internal word count, approximately 3,200 words as written above. This is significantly short of the 6,807,000 target. I need to continue and expand substantially. He came back to the kitchen, refilled the coffee, stood at the counter for a moment looking at the sticker on the thermos, the one Brandon had pressed on 3 months ago. Tongue between his teeth, doing something permanent and deliberate and happy about it. Stephen had not taken it off. He wasn't going to. There were things you kept because removing them would be a kind of statement, a kind of decision, and he wasn't making that decision. He went to bed. He slept, mostly. Not deeply, but enough. He woke at 5:15 without an alarm, because his body had learned long ago that 5:15 was when the next thing started, and his body was reliable in a way that the rest of the world sometimes wasn't. He made coffee correctly this time. 2 hands on the pot. He moved through the house with the practiced economy of someone who had figured out the exact choreography of a morning and no longer wasted motion on anything that didn't move the sequence forward. Shower. Clothes. Boots by the door left one first always. The habit of a man who tied his right boot first once while running late and tripped over a client's threshold on the way in and had never done it again. Thermos filled. Truck loaded the night before. So there was no truck loading. Just checking top secure. Posts in the bed. New mesh roll. Concrete. Tools. Everything where it should be. He was out the door at 5:55. Brandon's door was still closed. He'd go back to school today. Sunday afternoon. And there was something Stephen always did in the 30 seconds between getting in the truck and backing out of the driveway, a thing he didn't have a name for. Just a kind of standing still inside himself, an acknowledgement that the house would be different when he got home tonight. Quieter. Not empty, never exactly empty anymore, but quieter in the specific texture of quiet that exists when someone you love is not in it. He backed out, drove. The highway was thin at that hour, mostly trucks, and the occasional headlight of someone else who'd made promises that started before sunrise. He got to the gate at 6:28, not 6:30. 6:28, because he'd learned a long time ago that showing up 2 minutes early said something to people that showing up on time did not. It said, I thought about this before I arrived. It said, you were already in my head before I walked through the gate. He didn't mean it as a signal. It was just how he operated. It was what the work asked for. And Stephen Taylor did what the work asked for. The gate was already open, and Catherine was at the kitchen window. He could see her through the glass even at that hour. The kitchen light was on, and she was standing at the counter with a mug in both hands, hair done. Blazer already on, posture straight, everything in order, everything correct. Everything presenting the same version of herself she'd had at 8:30 the morning before. Except the mug. She was holding it with both hands in the way you hold something when you need something to hold on to, when you're not drinking it so much as anchoring to it. He unloaded the truck without going to the door. He knew the job. He didn't need to announce himself. He pulled on his gloves, checked yesterday's footings fully set, solid, exactly right, and started laying out the materials for the next section. He was threading the new mesh through the first run of posts when the back door opened. You're early. Her voice was carefully neutral, testing whether early was a problem. 2 minutes, a pause. I noticed. She came across the yard with a second mug, which meant she'd made it before she came out, which meant she'd planned to offer it before she even knew he was here. She set it on top of the toolbox, the only flat surface available, and that small, practical act of figuring out where to put the thing was somehow easier than any more deliberate gesture would have been. Stephen looked up from the mesh, took the mug. Thank you, she nodded. Stayed. She didn't make conversation and she didn't leave. And he noticed that she watched him work, the way Ashley had watched yesterday openly, without pretending she was doing something else. After a few minutes he asked, without looking up, sleep some. She said it without inflection. The board vote. Is it final? There's a shareholder vote in 3 weeks. She wrapped both hands around her own mug. But yes, it's final. They have the numbers and they've already drafted the transition language. A beat. I just haven't told anyone yet, except apparently you. He looked at her then. Why me? She thought about it. Actually thought about it, rather than reaching for the easiest version of the answer. Because you're going to be here 3 days and then you're going to leave. She said, you don't know anyone I know, and yesterday you didn't say you were sorry. Would it have helped? No. Direct, no hesitation. It never does. Everyone says they're sorry, and then they tell you what they think you did. Wrong. She looked at her mug. At least with you I just got the quiet. The quiet wasn't nothing, I know. She met his eyes briefly, that's why. She went back inside. Stephen drank the coffee. It was good coffee, the kind, made by someone who paid attention to small things, who measured and waited and didn't rush the process. He went back to the fence, and the morning opened up around him the way good work mornings do, quiet and purposeful, with all the peripheral noise of the world, pushed back just far enough to let the work speak at its natural volume. He was at it 40 minutes when he heard the argument. Not loud, not the kind of argument that announces itself, the pressurized kind. The kind that happens between two people who are both very smart and have known each other long, enough to find every available gap in the other person's defenses, and who both know it, and who are operating with perfect precision even while they are losing control. The voices came through the kitchen window. Catherine's, controlled, careful, each word exactly placed. Ashley's pushing, testing the control, looking for the place where it gives. I'm not a child. Ashley's voice clear, not pleading, just stating a fact that seemed to her obvious. I know you're not. Then stop making decisions about my life without telling me things. I'm not making decisions about your life. I'm managing my own situation. Your situation is my situation, Mom. Something in her voice shifted from pushing to something more direct, something more tired. We live in the same house. When you don't sleep, I don't sleep. When something's wrong, I feel it. You think I don't, but I do. I always have. A pause. I know you do. Catherine's voice changed. The control shifted, became something more careful, more fragile. Like it was holding now around a crack, rather than holding solid all the way through. So tell me, whatever it is, just tell me. Silence, long silence, the kind that means something real is being decided in it. Is it about my father? No, immediate, firm. This has nothing to do with your father. Is it money? We're fine. Is it the company? A pause 1 second too long to be nothing. Stephen set down the wire cutter, picked it back up, did not need to hear what came next. He understood already what the next weeks of Catherine Hill's life were going to look like. He understood it. The way he understood damaged fence posts from the outside, you couldn't always see it. But when you pressed at the base, you felt the give. You felt where the deterioration had started, and you knew. The argument went quiet, then the back door opened. Ashley came out not running but moving fast in the way of someone who needs to be in motion without being willing to say they need to be in motion. She stopped when she saw Stephen. He kept working. She told you, Ashley said. Not an accusation, just noting some of it. He checked a fastener. Yesterday. She doesn't tell people things. A brief pause. She didn't even tell me. She was protecting you. I don't need to be protected. Ashley's voice was very precise, very deliberate, in the way someone is deliberate when they are containing something larger than the sentence they're using. I need to know what's real. Stephen set down the pliers, turned, looked at her the way you look at someone who deserves a real answer instead of a managed one. Sometimes the people who love you most protect you from things before they've figured out how to carry the thing themselves. Not because they don't trust you, because they don't want to hand you something heavy before they know whether it's worth picking up. He held her gaze. That's not distrust. That's just trying to figure out the shape of it first. Ashley was quiet for a moment, processing, something settling behind her eyes. Then, is she going to lose the company? He thought about what to say. What was actually true? I think she might already have, he said. What I don't know is what she's going to build next. Ashley looked at the fence, at the new posts, straight and plumb and set deep. You go back to where the problem actually started, she said, using Brandon's words from yesterday, saying them like she'd been thinking about them. Is that what she needs to do? She already knows where it started, Stephen said. She just needs someone to hold the post while she checks the angle. Ashley looked at him for a long moment. Then she went back inside without saying anything more. And 2 minutes later he heard Catherine's voice through the window, and this time it was not controlled. It was quiet. The quieter thing. The real thing underneath the version she kept in order. He kept working. He felt, without looking directly at it, that something inside that house had shifted. Something that had been under too much pressure had been given permission to come down slowly, in a managed way, instead of suddenly, all at once. That mattered. He didn't need to be the reason for it. He just needed to keep his hands moving and the work going and give whatever was happening inside the space it needed to happen in. He was finishing the second footing when his phone buzzed. He checked it. A text from Brandon: just landed at school, forgot my good charger, can I order one? Stephen typed back, yes. Then a second, use the account. Brandon, thanks. Also the calculus girl, Ashley. She said if you're going back tomorrow, she'll have coffee ready. Stephen stared at his phone for a moment. Then, tell her thanks, and that's not necessary. Brandon, she said you'd say that. She said to tell you she's making it anyway. Stephen put his phone back in his pocket. He worked through the rest of the morning without interruption. He checked measurements. He replaced a section of mesh he'd initially thought might hold. It wouldn't, not through winter, not with the way the winds came from the north across that property, and ordered more through his account on his phone, while eating the lunch he'd packed, leaning against the truck with the gate post behind him. And Whitfield Hollow spread out on 3 sides, in the sharp particular clarity of October air. He was nearly done for the day when Catherine came back out. She had changed. The blazer was gone. She had on a gray pullover that fit her like she'd owned it for years, and her hair was slightly less precise than the morning version, and she moved across the yard differently, less like someone traversing a problem, more like someone crossing familiar ground. She stopped at the edge of his work area, looked at the section he'd finished. You replaced the mesh on the second run. The original would have gone before spring. That wasn't in the estimate. It wasn't visible when I wrote the estimate. He kept working. I called it as additional scope, and I'm not charging you for it. The mesh was $32. You can check the receipt. She looked at him. Something crossed her face, not suspicion this time. Just recalibrating again. The same way she'd recalibrated at 8:30 yesterday, and at the post yesterday afternoon. Like she kept adjusting her picture of him, and each time the adjustment required a slightly larger frame. You didn't have to do that. I know. Most contractors would have sent a change order. Most contractors would have. He straightened, checked the line from the end. I didn't see it coming, so I don't charge for it. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I made 3 calls this morning. To shareholders. Original funders from before the institutional money came in. He waited. 2 of them didn't know what was happening. No one had told them. The board went around them. Something in her voice tightened, but it was a different kind of tight than yesterday. Not the kind that was holding back, the kind that was focusing. They're angry, specifically angry. One of them used the word betrayal. That's useful. Yes. She looked at him. It's also I don't know. 11 years and this is where we are, watching other people be angry on my behalf, because I somehow didn't see this coming fast enough to stop it. Stephen picked up the level. Did you not see it coming, or did you see it and think you had more time? The question landed with a weight he hadn't entirely intended. Catherine looked at the fence, then at the ground, then at some middle distance that was neither. The second one, she said. He nodded. Then you saw it. You just made a call about timing and the call didn't land. He checked the level. That's not the same thing as not seeing. She was quiet long enough that he thought she might leave. Then, I have a meeting with George Harris on Tuesday. He was the second person who ever wrote me a check. Before the business had a name. Before it had anything. Start with him, Stephen said. I am. A pause. He said he'd been waiting for me to call. Her voice did something small and complicated on that last sentence. Said he'd been watching what the board was doing and waiting for me to push back. People wait to be asked sometimes, even when they're already on your side. She looked at him, really looked, with the particular kind of attention you give something, when you're not deciding what to think about it yet, when you're just taking it in and letting it sit. Why are you helping me with this? This is not a fence. He opened the gate to test it. Too much drag on the hinge, not today's work, the original hardware. He made a note, closed it again. No, he said, but you needed someone to hold the post steady while you checked the angle. He picked up his level. That's all I'm doing. She looked at the gate, at the fence, at the clean line of it running true along the property edge, and at the section still unfinished and at the work still in front of them. It's good work, she said. Not the estimate, not the price, the work itself. The thing he'd actually done. He looked at her. I know, he said. He started loading tools into the truck. She didn't go inside right away. She stood at the fence line, and he was aware of her standing, there the way you're aware of something that has settled into the background of a room, and changed the room slightly by being in it. When he came back for the second load, she was still there. The gate hardware, she said. On the east side, I noticed. He lifted the toolbox. The hinges are worn. If you get another hard winter, the gate will start dragging. Can you fix it? He looked at her. The fence was the job. The fence was finished or nearly finished. Anything beyond it was a different conversation, and both of them were aware of what kind of conversation that was not the words, but the awareness of it, sitting in the space between them. 2-hour job, he said. I can do it the last day. She nodded. Neither of them said what the other one heard, which was that they had just agreed to something beyond gate hinges. Stephen picked up the last of his tools and carried them to the truck and did not examine that awareness too closely, the way you don't press on something that's been set but isn't done curing. He drove home. He picked up his phone at a stoplight and looked at the sticker on the thermos on the passenger seat. the cartoon creeper, pressed on by a 19-year-old kid who'd made the dean's list and celebrated it with a sticker because that was who Brandon Walker was. Because he'd grown up in a house where the important things were not celebrated loudly, but were acknowledged, were noticed, were placed carefully, permanently, on the most visible surface available and never taken off. Exit 7, Exit 8. Stephen drove and did not think about Catherine Hill's voice when she said it's good work, did not think about the 2 hands on the mug, and the specific thing that 2 hands on a mug means when someone is trying to keep themselves in one piece before the day starts. Did not think about 11 years, a second bedroom, a daughter who watched from windows. He thought about the post, the third one, the one that gave. He thought about the difference between what things look like and what they actually are, about the whole skill of it, the whole discipline, learning to press at the base before you decide what something can hold, learning to not trust the surface just because the surface looks solid, learning that the truth is almost always further down than you'd think, in the part you can't see without getting on your knees in the dirt and pressing your hand into the wood and waiting for the give or the hold. He took his exit, made his turns, pulled into the driveway of the house that Linda's grandmother had owned and that Linda's parents had wanted to buy back after she died, and that he had said no to because some things are not numbers, and some decisions cannot be made the way other decisions are made, and this house was one of them. He sat in the driveway for a moment. Then he went inside and made dinner and ate it at the kitchen table in the quiet of a house with one person in it, and the kitchen felt the way it always felt when Brandon wasn't in it, complete in its own way, but a different kind of complete, like a sentence that's grammatically fine, but somehow isn't the sentence you meant to write. He washed the dishes. He sat back down. He drank coffee that went lukewarm while he wasn't paying attention to it. He thought about what it would mean to let something matter again. Not the large version of that. Not the version with architecture and intention and planning. The small version. The version that starts with just noticing that something has stopped hurting without you having to work at it. The version that starts with a sticker on a thermos and a woman holding a fence post with both hands because she decided to do the thing completely or not at all. He sat with it, didn't press, let it be what it was. Then he went to bed, and before he went to sleep for the first time in a long time, he didn't do the math. He was back at 6:28, not 6:30, never 6:30, because 6:28 meant something 6:30 didn't. It meant the job was already in him before he arrived. It meant the day had started with this specific place and this specific work and whoever was in it. He didn't intend it as a message. It was just how he was built. The gate was open. The coffee light was on in the kitchen. Catherine was at the window again. Both hands on the mug again. Hair done, blazer on, posture correct, the full presentation, assembled before 7 in the morning for an audience of nobody, except that wasn't what it was. He understood that now. The presentation wasn't for an audience. It was for herself. It was the thing she put on in the morning the same way he laced his boots left first. Ritual. Steadying. A way of telling your own body, we are doing this today. We are going to be fine. He unloaded the truck. Didn't knock. Started the morning the same way he always started, checking yesterday's work first, before touching anything new. Both footings from Tuesday. Solid, set correctly. The concrete had cured overnight exactly as it should, which it would, because he'd mixed it right, and poured it right, and given it the time it needed rather than the time he wished it needed. He was running the new mesh line when the back door opened. She came out with 2 mugs, set his on the toolbox, kept hers, and they stood in the early morning, without saying anything for a moment, which was becoming, without either of them deciding it was, a thing they did. 2 minutes early again, she finally said. Old habit. She looked at him over the rim of her mug. Something in her eyes was different this morning. Not softer exactly, more present. Like she'd spent the night arriving at some decision and had woken up already on the other side of it. I couldn't sleep, she said. I know. How do you know? The light in the kitchen was on when I pulled up. It's the kind of on that means it's been on a while. She looked at her mug. Almost something. Not quite. George Harris confirmed the Tuesday meeting. 8 in the morning. He wants to see the financial documentation going back 4 years. That's good. It means I have 48 hours to build the case I should have been building for the last 3 weeks. She said it without self-pity, just straight, an accounting of time and what it had cost her. I've been managing the emotional fallout. I should have been documenting. You can do both. Not well. Nobody does anything well when it first hits, Stephen said. The first 2 weeks after Linda died, I couldn't remember if I'd fed Brandon on any given day. I had a system, a literal written checklist on the refrigerator. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, check, because I couldn't trust my own brain. He said a post-clamp. You start trusting it again. Just takes longer than you think it should. Catherine looked at him. That particular look, the one that was recalculating, adjusting the frame. You don't talk about her much, no. But you're talking about her now. He checked the clamp. Apparently. She didn't push, which was the right thing. He noticed she'd learned when not to push, and he noticed that he'd noticed it, and he filed both of those things away without deciding what to do with them. She went back inside to work. He went back to the fence. The morning moved forward. October now, doing what October does in Connecticut, warm in the direct sun, cold the moment you stepped into shade, the sky, that particular shade of blue that only exists in the 2 weeks before everything changes. He was making good time. The east section was close to finished. 2 more full posts, a gate-side anchor, and the mesh could run continuous from corner to corner for the first time in what looked like at least 2 years. The Mercedes came through the gate at 9:40. Black, clean, new. The kind of car selected specifically to communicate something, not just wealth, but a particular variety of it. The variety that had been decided upon deliberately, that had been chosen as a statement about the person driving it. Stephen heard the engine before he saw it, looked up when it cleared the gate, watched it come to a stop in the gravel drive. The man who got out was late 40s. Expensive jacket over a collared shirt, dark hair with enough gray at the temples to make him look established rather than old. He moved with the specific ease of someone who had long ago made a determination about the kind of man he was, and had been proving it ever since. Most rooms rearranged themselves when he walked in. He walked like he knew that, walked like it was a fact of physics. He looked at the fence, not at the work. Not at the quality of what had been done or the precision of the posts or the straightness of the line. He looked at the property boundary, the length of it, the footprint. He was measuring the land. Stephen kept working. The man, Eric King, though Stephen didn't know his name yet, turned and looked at Stephen with the vaguely acknowledging gaze of someone who has decided a person is not relevant to his current purpose. Contractor? That's right. Where's Catherine inside? Eric nodded once, without gratitude, and walked toward the house, like it was still his house, like the driveway was still his driveway, like the gate he'd driven through was a thing he had rights to. Stephen watched him go, then went back to the mesh. He found out who Eric was at noon, when Catherine came outside, and her face told the whole story before she opened her mouth. Not collapsed, not cracked, but holding something at enormous cost, the way a load-bearing wall holds when the beam above it is compromised, technically intact, but working much harder than it was designed to. That was Eric King, she said. My ex-husband, Ashley's father. Stephen waited. He heard about the board situation. Her jaw was set. He has a friend on the board. He always has a friend somewhere. She crossed her arms, then uncrossed them, cycling through positions, looking for the one that felt stable. He's petitioning for primary custody. Temporary, his attorney says. During the period of my professional instability. She said the last 3 words the way you say something you're quoting without agreeing to. He wants to revisit the property arrangement as well. Says the market is good right now, and splitting the asset makes sense given my changing financial situation. Stephen stopped. Working. He turned and looked at her fully. Changing financial situation. His words, not mine. Her eyes were doing what they'd done yesterday at the property line, holding something in by sheer decision. He also made an offer. On the house. He wants to buy out my share. What did you say? I said I'd think about it. She looked at him directly. Which I won't. Good. She stared at him. You don't even know the offer. Doesn't matter. He picked up the wire cutter. Some things you don't sell even when the number sounds reasonable. My wife's parents wanted to buy back her grandmother's house the year after she died. They had 10 reasons. Every one of them made sense. He looked at Catherine. I still live in that house. Brandon grew up in it. That's not a number. Catherine went very still. He hadn't meant to say that. It came out the way things come out sometimes, when you've been careful for so long that the carefulness develops a hairline fracture and something slips through in the wrong direction. He hadn't talked about Linda's house, what it meant, why he stayed, not to anyone, outside the family. Not in 4 years. I'm sorry, Catherine said quietly. Not filling the space with it, placing it there like something she meant. Don't be. He went back to the fence. It's how I know what I'm talking about. A silence that had the quality of something being respected. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at it. Ashley's name, not a call, a text. One line, Brandon's here. Came by after class. Do you need him today? He read it twice. Looked at the remaining work. Looked at the time. He typed back, send him out. Brandon came around the side of the house, 30 seconds later, still in his jacket from the drive up, backpack hanging off one shoulder. He looked at the fence line, did his standard 4-second assessment, and arrived at east. Section's almost done. Almost. The gate hardware is still original. I know. Brandon put down his backpack and pulled on the pair of gloves he kept in the side pocket. Because he had learned, at approximately age 14, that showing up without gloves was a choice that cost you an hour of work. He started on the mesh tension line without being asked, because he'd done this enough times to know where he was useful. And because asking whether he was needed was a thing that wasted everybody's time. They worked side by side without talking for 20 minutes, which was a thing Stephen had always loved about working with his son. The silence between them was never empty. It was collaborative. It was two people paying attention to the same thing and trusting each other to handle the part in front of them. Then the back door opened and Ashley came out. She stopped when she saw Brandon. Brandon looked up from the tension line, and there was a moment, brief, almost nothing, the kind you could miss if you weren't looking for it, where both of them adjusted. Not dramatically, just a small internal shift, like two compass needles responding to the same field. You went to the event, Ashley said. Not hello, just that. Brandon's hands didn't stop moving on the mesh, the STEM career thing. At Northfield, last month, you argued with the panel moderator. He was wrong about applied mathematics. He was the moderator. Being the moderator doesn't make you right about applied mathematics. Ashley looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone who has just confirmed a hypothesis. You're exactly like I thought you'd be. Is that good or bad? Undecided. She looked at Stephen. They knew each other before you knew my mother. Stephen kept his eyes on the post he was anchoring. I gathered. Does that seem strange? No. He checked the level. Seems like how things go sometimes. Ashley stood for a moment at the edge of the work area, watching both of them with the particular attention she gave to things she was still forming opinions about. Then she went back inside. Brandon waited until the door closed. Then, without looking up from the mesh, she's smart, I know. Like past the academic kind, the other kind. Stephen said nothing. Is this weird? Brandon asked. Stephen set the level down, picked it up again. Ask me in a week. Brandon nodded, accepted that, went back to the tension line. Because he was Brandon Walker, and he knew when to leave a question where it landed. The afternoon moved. The east section finished. Stephen started the gate hardware assessment. Original hinges, worn down to approximately 60% of their design tolerance, which meant they'd hold through this winter and probably fail partway through the next one. He made notes. He didn't touch them yet. The fence first. Always the structure before the points of entry. Eric King came back out of the house at 2:15. He walked to his car without going near the fence. But he stopped beside the driveway and looked at Stephen with a different expression than the morning one. The morning one had been dismissive. This one was calculating. How long have you been working here? Measured. Casual in the way that deliberate questions are casual.
3 days.
Stephen kept working. You've been back each day. Job's not finished. Eric looked at the fence, at the gate, at the line of it running clean and true. She have you doing other work beyond the fence? Stephen straightened,
Looked at Eric directly, not aggressively.
just fully. The way you look at something when you want to see it clearly and you want it to know it's being seen.
I'm done for the afternoon.
Have a good day. He turned back to the tools. He heard Eric's car door, heard the engine, heard the crunch of gravel as the Mercedes reversed out and pulled away. He didn't watch it go.
He gave it no more attention
Then he'd give the weather noted, processed, filed, but he thought about it on the drive to pick up supplies from the hardware store. He thought about the way Eric King had looked at the fence, and the land and the gate, and then at Catherine's contractor with the specific expression of a man who was counting things, adding them up, the look of someone whose plan depends on a particular arrangement of pieces, staying in their correct positions, and who has just noticed that one of the pieces may have moved. He thought, that man is afraid of something. And then he thought, that's useful to know. Catherine called him at 4:47. He was in the truck in the parking lot of the hardware store. Supplies in the bed, engine running. His attorney sent a formal notice this afternoon. Her voice had the texture of someone who has just absorbed something they were bracing for, and discovered that bracing for it didn't actually help. He's filing for temporary primary custody, pending what he's calling a period of professional and financial instability. A pause. He's citing the board situation as evidence of stress-related impaired judgment. Stephen said nothing.
He's been planning this.
Her voice went flat in the particular way of someone arriving at a realization they should have arrived at earlier and resent themselves for being late to. The friend on the board, the timeline, the property offer. He was positioned before I even knew what was happening. How long has he had a friend on the board? A pause. I don't know. Another pause. Long enough. Stephen looked out the windshield at the parking lot. At the ordinary afternoon going on in it, cars pulling in, people walking out, with lumber and paint and whatever they needed to fix the things that needed fixing in their lives. Does Ashley know about the custody petition? No. Fast. Too fast. Catherine, I know. A breath. I know what you're going to say. She'll find out, Stephen said. From you is better. From her father by accident, or from a legal document she wasn't supposed to see, is worse. I'm aware of that. I know you are. A long silence. Outside, a woman loaded bags of concrete into a minivan with the focused efficiency of someone who had a project and a schedule and no time to waste. He looked at you, Catherine said, when he left. She stopped, started again. He asked me about you, after you left to get supplies. He asked how long you'd been here, and why you kept coming back. Stephen was quiet. I told him you were finishing a job. Her voice had gone careful, precise in a different way than its usual precision. This was the precision of someone choosing words on a surface that isn't stable. He said contractors don't usually come back 3 days in a row for a fence. Some fences take 3 days. I told him that. And then he said, this one apparently takes longer. Stephen let that sit where it landed. Then, what are you going to do about the custody petition? My attorney is drafting a response. She said it like what it was the beginning of something long and expensive and exhausting. It'll be formal. Documented. Correct in every procedural way. Is that what you want? It's what you do. That's not what I asked. The silence this time had a different quality. Less thinking, more recognition. Like he'd asked the question she'd been working around. No, she said finally. What I want is for him to call our daughter and have a real conversation with her. What I want is for him to be her father instead of building a legal strategy around her. Her voice caught just, briefly, just the edge of something bigger pressing against the controlled surface. What I want is to not have to explain to Ashley why her life is a line item in her father's financial plan. Stephen said nothing for a moment, because sometimes saying nothing is the most accurate response. I'll be there at 6:28 tomorrow, he said. I know you will. He could hear something in that. Not just the statement, the relief of it. The specific relief of someone for whom the predictability of a person is not a disappointment but an anchor. She hung up. He sat in the parking lot for another minute, not thinking exactly. Just letting the afternoon settle around the shape of what he now understood was happening. Eric King was not just a difficult ex-husband. He was a man who had positioned himself ahead of every move Catherine would make, who had a source inside her company, who had been watching and waiting for the moment when she was most exposed, and now he was using the most important thing in Catherine's life, Ashley, as leverage in a strategy that had nothing to do with his daughter and everything to do with money and the specific satisfaction of being the reason someone else loses. Stephen had met men like this before. Not always in the same circumstances, but the architecture was familiar. The thing they shared was not cruelty exactly. It was the inability to separate winning from worth. The need for someone else's loss in order to feel like they'd gained something real. He started the truck, drove back to the job site to drop the supplies. Catherine's car was in the drive. The kitchen light was on, and through the window, he could see Ashley at the counter. At the counter doing something with her phone, and the ordinary domesticity of it person, in a kitchen evening, light on was something he registered, and then moved past. He unloaded the supplies, organized them for tomorrow, locked the tailgate. Then he drove home. Brandon's car was in the driveway, already back from Whitfield Hollow, which meant he'd left while Stephen was at the hardware store. Stephen went inside and found him in the kitchen making a sandwich with the methodical focus of a person who had been thinking about that sandwich since 2 o'clock. "You came back early," Stephen said. Ashley had studying. Brandon put the sandwich together, cut it in half, which Stephen had taught him to do at age 8 for reasons he no longer remembered, but that Brandon had maintained as a non-negotiable principle ever since. "She's good, Dad," you said. "No, I mean." Brandon turned around, leaned against the counter, looked at his father with the specific directness he deployed when he wanted to say something that mattered and wanted it received correctly. "She's the kind of good where you find yourself trying to be better just because she's nearby. You know that kind." Stephen looked at his son. "I know that kind." Brandon nodded once, picked up his sandwich. "Is it okay? The whole situation?" "I don't know what the situation is, Dad." Brandon. His son looked at him for a long moment, then okay, took a bite. "But for the record, if you're trying to talk yourself out of it, you've been trying to talk yourself out of things for 4 years. A pause, not accusatory, just factual in the way Brandon always was. Linda would have told you to stop. Stephen went to the refrigerator, got the leftover soup from 2 nights ago, put it on the stove. "She would have said something more specific than that," he said. Brandon almost smiled. "Yeah, she would have." He took his sandwich to the table. "She would have said something that you'd be thinking about for 6 months. 3 to 4, usually." "Right, 3 to 4. Brandon sat down, looked at his plate, then looked up. Ashley said her mom hasn't laughed like really laughed in a long time. He said it carefully, the way he said things he wanted to land gently. "She said you made her mom use the dish towel line." Stephen turned from the stove. "The what?" "The line, the fence line, holding the post." Brandon looked perfectly serious. "Ashley said her mom came inside and told her about it. Said something about how you asked her to hold the post while you checked the angle. That it was, she said her mom came inside and looked different." He paused, like she remembered something. Stephen stirred the soup, looked at the pot, said nothing. "Okay," Brandon said. "I'm done. Good, for now, Brandon. Just eating my sandwich." They ate. The kitchen was warm, and the soup was good, and the evening settled in around them in the particular way of evenings, when something is happening slowly and neither person is naming it. After dinner, Brandon did homework at the table. Stephen sat across from him, reading a trade publication about concrete formulations that he'd been meaning to get through for 6 weeks and kept putting down. He thought about Eric King. He thought about the way Eric had looked at the land, about the email that had gone to Catherine's attorney, about a man who had positioned himself in the board. Before Catherine knew there was a position to defend, who had a network and a strategy and a timeline and a plan for every eventuality except one. He thought about what it would mean to call Eric King directly. Not for Catherine, not as some gesture, Just to say the thing that 3 years of legal procedure couldn't say. Because sometimes the formal language was exactly what let everyone stay protected, while nothing real got communicated. He thought about whether that was his call to make. He thought about whether it mattered that it wasn't. He put down the trade publication, went to bed, set the alarm for 5:15, which he didn't need but set anyway, because the alarm was its own form of intention, of commitment. In the morning he woke before it. Lay in the dark for exactly 3 minutes, which was how long it took his body to confirm that, yes, this was the day, and yes, he was going to do it, and no, he hadn't decided yet whether that was right or wrong. He just knew he was going to do it. He made coffee, loaded the truck, drove 40 minutes to Whitfield Hollow in the early dark. The gate was open at 6:26. He was 2 minutes early even by his own standard, which he took as information. He set up without going to the house. He started the gate hardware removal original hinges, 4 screws each, worn washers, the particular groan of metal that has been in place too long and resists being touched. He worked quietly in the early light. The house was still. The kitchen window was dark. Then at 6:45, he picked up his phone. Eric King's number was in the email. Catherine had forwarded to him 3 days ago, the one from the property line dispute with the driver's insurance. Eric had been copied. Stephen had noted the number then without knowing he was noting it. He called. It rang twice. Eric King answered with the wariness of someone who has received enough unexpected calls to know they usually mean something. Who is this? Stephen Taylor. I've been working on Catherine Hill's fence. A pause. Recalibrating. Then the smoothness returned, the practiced ease, the voice of a man who was very good at not being caught off guard even when he was. How did you get this number? You were copied on a property dispute email 3 days ago. And you thought it was appropriate to call me? No, Stephen kept his voice level. I thought it was necessary. A silence. Then, and this was interesting, this was the thing he'd been thinking about since the parking lot yesterday. Eric didn't hang up. A man with nothing to hear would have hung up. Eric stayed on the line. Your daughter read the custody petition, Stephen said. Not from you. From a laptop screen that was left open. She's 19. And she read the part about professional instability, and she understood exactly what it meant. He paused. She understood it the way a 20-year-old understands being used as a point in an argument. Which is to say completely. The silence on the other end had a different texture now. Still. But not the still of someone in control. The still of someone listening. I'm not telling you this because Catherine asked me to, Stevens said. She doesn't know I'm calling. She would probably tell me it's not my place, a beat. She'd be right. Then, why are you calling? Because Ashley talked to me. Not to her mother, not to her father, to me, the contractor fixing the fence. And the fact that she talked to me instead of either of you is information. He let that land. She said she doesn't need a custody arrangement. She said she needs a father. She said those are 2 different things, and she needed someone to understand the difference before she'd talk to you about anything else. A long silence. When Eric spoke again, the smoothness was gone. What was underneath it was harder to categorize, not soft exactly, but different. Like something that had been underneath for a while and wasn't used to being in the open. She said that. To me. About an hour before your attorney sent that email. Another silence. Longer. She talks to you. She talks to people who listen. He let that be the last thing he said. He didn't fill the silence that followed. He'd learned 4 months of insurance phone calls, 4 months of forms and denials and appeals, that the silence after the true thing is where the other person does or doesn't decide to hear it. You couldn't push them into hearing. You could only say it clearly and leave them room. Eric said, I'll think about it. Okay, the fence, his voice had shifted again. I drove past it when I left yesterday. It's a pause. It's good work. Thank you. Eric hung up. Stephen set his phone down on the toolbox, picked up the new hinge hardware he'd brought from the supply run yesterday, started fitting it to the post. His hands were steady. The work was straightforward. The morning was getting on, and there was more of it to fill. He thought that was probably not his call to make. He thought he made it anyway. He thought Catherine was going to find out. He kept working. She found out at 2:15.
She came out of the house with the particular energy of someone who has received new information and is moving through the phase where they haven't yet decided what to do with it. Her attorney had received a notification. Eric's filing had been formally withdrawn. Temporary custody petition dismissed by the petitioner. Effective immediately. She looked at Stephen. He kept his hands on the new hinge. Didn't look hold him. Not a question. Yes, without asking me, yes, Stephen. Her voice was not the boardroom voice, not the controlled, precise voice. It was the voice from underneath that one, the real one. The one he'd heard through the kitchen window talking to Ashley about whether to fall apart or not. You had no right to do that. He set down the wrench, turned, looked at her directly. I know. This is you don't understand what that situation is. You don't understand the legal you're right. He didn't interrupt. He just said it clearly. I overstepped. I didn't ask you. I should have. He held her gaze. I'm sorry. She looked at him, looking for something, for defensiveness, for justification, for the explanation that would let her stay angry in the way she'd prepared to be. She didn't find it, because there wasn't one. He'd done a thing without asking. He was sorry. Both of those were true at the same time, and he wasn't going to untangle them into something more convenient. I don't know whether to be angry, or she stopped. You can be both, he said. I'm not going anywhere. She pressed her fingers to her eyes, a gesture he'd seen before. 10 seconds of herself. Just 10, while she found the thread again. She dropped her. What did you say to him? He told her. Exactly what he'd said, in the order he'd said it. Nothing editorialized. She listened without interrupting, which was not easy for her. He could see it, not being easy. Could see her restraining responses at 3 or 4 different points. She listened anyway. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Ashley talked to you, she said. The afternoon Eric came the first time. She came out while you were still on the call, and she said she needs a father, not a custody arrangement. Almost exactly that. Catherine looked at the gate. At the new hinges, clean and correctly seated, the kind of work you didn't notice, because it looked like how things were supposed to look. She's been angrier at me than I understood. Since the divorce. She said it like something she'd known for a while and hadn't said out loud. I thought she was angry at the situation. But I think she's been angry at both of us. For different things. For a long time, probably, Stephen said, and she told the contractor. People tell whoever's available and listening. Catherine looked at him. You were available. I was there. Most people are there, she said. They're not all listening. He didn't answer that. Let it be what it was. She looked back at the gate, at the new hinges, at the swing of it, clean and free, the drag entirely gone. You fixed the hardware this morning. You were right about the winter. She reached out and pushed the gate open. It moved without resistance. No drag, no catch. Just the clean, full arc of something that had been corrected at the source. She held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it, the balance. It's different, she said. That's what happens when you address the actual problem. She let the gate swing back. It latched cleanly. She looked at him, and there was something in her expression that he didn't have a name for. Yet, something that was not quite resolved, not quite okay, but was moving in a direction, like a post that's been reset, the concrete still curing, but plumb, true, and pointing the right way. George Harris called this afternoon, she said, before the custody news. He's bringing 2 other original shareholders to Tuesday's meeting. She paused. He said he'd made 3 calls last night, the kind that happen before anyone's official position is public. How many votes does that give you? Not enough alone, but George knows people. Something came into her voice, not confidence exactly. More like the memory of what confidence feels like before you've earned it back. He said, Catherine, he always calls me Catherine. The people who want to take this from you are counting on you being too tired to fight. Don't be tired yet, good man, Stephen said. He's 73 years old. He started his first company at 40. Her voice caught briefly. He said he'd been watching me for 11 years, and that what the board was doing was the most predictable thing he'd ever seen, and he was embarrassed it had taken him this long to say so. Stephen picked up the wrench. put it back in the toolbox, started organizing for the end of the day, which was close. Tuesday's the meeting, Tuesday morning. Then you've got the weekend. I know, she looked at him. The look had settled into something steadier than it had been an hour ago. Not forgiven exactly, or not only that, more like she'd found the thread again. Put herself back together, around something that was still real. You're going to be here tomorrow. Last day on the fence, and the gate hardware's done. She tested it again, just with her fingertips, the swing of it. So, tomorrow is just finishing. Checking the whole line, making sure everything holds together as a system. She looked at the fence. The whole length of it posts straight, mesh tight, running clean from one end to the other. The work of 3 days. The work underneath the work. Will you come Tuesday? Not for anything to fix. I'd like Ashley has a presentation, history project. She's been working on it for 2 weeks. A pause. I think she'd want you there. And Brandon. He looked at her. What time, he said. 7. Dinner first. We'll be there at 6:28. Something crossed her face, a brief, unguarded flash of something real. Not performed. Just there and then gone, the way things are when they're not being managed. She turned and walked back toward the house. At the door, she stopped. Didn't turn around. Just said, clearly, into the afternoon, thank you, and I'm still deciding about the other thing. He watched her go inside. He stood at the fence line for a moment, pressed his palm against the post closest to him, at the base, the way he always did, testing, checking, feeling for what was there, solid, fully cured, not giving. He packed his tools, drove home in the last of the afternoon light. Brandon was already in the kitchen when he got there, working on homework at the table, which meant he'd driven back from Whitfield Hollow and come straight home and started studying, which was exactly what Brandon Walker did. Stephen put water on for pasta, looked at his phone. Nothing from Catherine, nothing from Eric King, which was not the same as nothing. He thought about the call, about whether he'd had the right to make it. He still didn't know. He thought he'd done it for the right reason. He thought the right reason wasn't enough to make it the right choice. Those two things could both be true, and they were. He'd apologized, he'd meant it. What happened next was not in his hands. And his hands were fine with that, because they had pasta to make, and a table to set, and a son across the room who was working through a problem on paper with the same patient attention his father gave to concrete. He set the table, made dinner, sat down. He did not think about Tuesday. He thought about Tuesday the entire time. The weekend moved differently than the week had, slower, more weight to each hour. The kind of time that happens when you know something is coming, and the knowing changes the texture of the waiting. Stephen worked a smaller job Saturday, a retaining wall repair 2 towns over, straightforward, half a day, and spent Sunday doing the things that accumulate when you've spent 3 consecutive days focused somewhere else. Truck maintenance, invoicing, a grocery run that took twice as long as it should have, because he stood in the produce section for 4 minutes, holding a bag of apples and not thinking about apples at all. Brandon noticed. Of course he noticed. He didn't say anything, which was its own form of commentary, because Brandon Walker did not stay quiet about things unless he'd decided that saying them would make the situation worse. He made himself scarce on Sunday, did homework in his room, made his own dinner without asking, gave his father the entire kitchen table and the evening and everything in it, which was a gift. Stephen didn't know how to acknowledge without acknowledging what it was for. He didn't sleep well Sunday night. Not badly. Not the kind of not sleeping that means something is wrong, just the kind where you're aware of the ceiling for longer than usual, where your mind keeps moving through the same territory, without arriving anywhere new. He thought about Tuesday's presentation. He thought about George Harris's phone call and what it would mean if the votes didn't hold. He thought about Eric King's silence since Friday's call, the withdrawal of the custody petition, and then nothing. No response, no contact, which was not the same as resolution, but was something. He thought about Catherine at the gate, the way she'd pushed it open and held it and felt the weight of it corrected, balanced right. The way she'd said, "It's different," and the specific quality of her voice when she'd said it. which was not the voice of a woman commenting on gate hardware, which was the voice of someone saying something true about the shape of the last week, and the week before it, and the weeks she'd been carrying before he ever pulled up to that property. He went to sleep eventually. He always went to sleep eventually. That was another thing about the life he'd built. You didn't stay awake past the point of usefulness. There was always morning. Morning was always early. Monday he finished the retaining wall, sent the invoice, made a call about the next job, a deck repair in Ridgefield, starting next week. Good money, straightforward scope. He wrote it in the calendar. He ate lunch at the job site, standing beside his truck the way he always did, and the ordinary rhythm of it, the work, the tools, the sequence of what came next was steadying in the particular way that only something you've done 10,000 times can be steadying. He thought about calling Catherine. He didn't, not because there was nothing to say, because whatever needed to be said would be said Tuesday. In the context of a dinner and a school presentation, and 4 people in a room together, which was a more honest setting than a phone call where both of them would be performing some version of casual. He went home, made dinner, sat with Brandon, who'd driven home from school again Monday evening. Ostensibly because he'd left his good Charger the first time, which was true, but which was also clearly not the only reason. They ate. They talked about the deck job in Ridgefield. They talked about Brandon's applied mathematics professor, who had given back midterms with comments that Brandon described as technically accurate but spiritually incorrect. They cleaned up the kitchen together. They watched an hour of something neither of them would remember by Wednesday. And when the lights went out and the house went quiet, Stephen lay in the dark and allowed himself, for the first time, to think clearly about what was actually happening. Not the fence, not the gate hardware, not the shareholder vote or the custody withdrawal or the presentation on Tuesday. The thing underneath all of it. He thought about Linda, not with the particular weight that thinking about Linda had carried for 4 years. The specific gravity of a loss that has rearranged the structure of your days. He thought about her with something different. Something that felt like gratitude and grief at the same time, which was maybe what gratitude always felt like when the thing you were grateful for was also something you'd lost. Linda had known what he was, had named it, had said it plainly. You show up. You're there before people know they need you, and you stay after the others have left. She'd said it like a fact, like a feature of his particular construction. And he'd spent 15 years being slightly embarrassed by it, by the smallness of it, by the way it didn't look like much from the outside, by the way it never made the official record of anything. He was done being embarrassed. He closed his eyes. Tomorrow was Tuesday. He was up at 5:15. Shower, coffee, the deliberate choreography of a morning where the destination matters. He chose his clothes with slightly more attention than usual, which Brandon observed without commenting on when he appeared in the kitchen at 6:30, which was early for a Tuesday, with no job site to be at, which was its own form of statement. You're up, Stephen said. Couldn't sleep either. Brandon poured coffee, leaned against the counter. Is it weird that I'm nervous about a high school weight college? No, high school presentation? She's not in high school, right? The other school. Brandon wrapped both hands around his mug. Is it weird that I'm nervous about an undergraduate presentation for a class I'm not in, given by someone I've known for 1 week? Stephen looked at his son. A little weird, yeah, okay. Brandon drank his coffee. Good to know. They drove to Whitfield Hollow together, Brandon's car, in the driveway, and no discussion about it. They just both got into Stephen's truck, which was what they'd done since Brandon was old enough to stop needing a car seat, and which was, on certain kinds of days, the right vehicle for the right reasons. The evening was cold. Real cold now, October having finally arrived at the temperature it had been threatening all month. The sky was dark early and clear and sharp, and the neighborhood around the Hill property had the particular stillness of residential streets on weekday evenings when everyone is inside, and the world narrows to the radius of what's directly in front of you. They pulled up at 6:28.
Of course they did. Brandon looked at the clock on the dash and looked at his father. Is that don't? I wasn't going to say anything. You were about to say something. I was going to say, it's an interesting coincidence that we happened to arrive at exactly Brandon. Getting out of the truck now, the gate was open. The fence ran clean and straight along the property edge, catching the light from the house in thin, bright lines. Every post exactly where Stephen had set it. The whole line plumb and solid and looking thing like it had always been there, which was the highest compliment you could pay a fence, that it looked inevitable, like the land itself had required it. Ashley opened the door before they knocked. She was dressed carefully, not formally, but with the specific intention of someone who had thought about what she put on and had decided it was right. Her hair was down. She had a folder in one hand, with notes that she'd clearly reorganized at least twice, the edges slightly soft from handling. She looked at Brandon. Brandon looked at her. One beat. You came, she said. I said I would. Brandon wasn't doing the voice he used when he was being casually confident. He was doing the voice he used when he meant something, which was quieter, which was, Stephen had always thought, his better voice. Also, I've been thinking about the argument we started about integral calculus on Saturday, and I have 3 additional points. We didn't start an argument about integral calculus on Saturday. We absolutely did. You said Leibniz's notation was more intuitive, and I said it was more widely adopted. Not more intuitive. There's a difference? There's an enormous difference. Ashley stepped back to let them in. Come argue inside where it's warm. The house smelled like garlic and something slow-cooked and good. Catherine was at the stove, and she turned when they came in. And this was the thing Stephen noticed and filed away without making a production of it. She was in a dark green sweater with her hair down. Not arranged, just down, which was how she'd looked on the morning. She'd brought 2 coffees out before sunrise. Less prepared, more herself. She looked at Stephen. He looked at her. One of those looks that has a whole conversation in it, that doesn't get said because the room is full and the timing isn't right, but that also doesn't need to be said because both people already know what it contains. It lasted approximately 2 seconds. Then Ashley said something to Brandon from across the kitchen, and the moment passed into the general flow of the evening and was gone. Except that it wasn't gone at all. It was just filed. For later. Dinner's in 20 minutes, Catherine said. I made more than enough. Ashley requested pasta again, which means I've made pasta twice in a week for the first time since she was 9. Pasta is a consistent choice, Brandon said seriously. Thank you. Ashley pointed at him. That's what I said. She specifically asked me not to dress the salad this time, Ashley added, going to the refrigerator. So I'm not making salad. You overdressed it last time, Brandon said. I was nervous. About what? She gave him a look that was a complete sentence. He received it and appeared to decide that discretion was appropriate. They ate at the kitchen table, all 4 of them, in the specific comfortable chaos of people who have learned each other's rhythms without planning to. Catherine at one end, particular about how the sauce cooked. Ashley with a piece of bread she was eating, while standing up, which apparently was a habit Catherine had given up trying to address. Brandon setting the table with the quiet efficiency Stephen had taught him at age 12, glasses first, then silverware, then plates, left to right, because there was a correct order for things. Stephen filled water glasses, found the right serving spoon without being told where it was, because he'd noticed it in the drawer the first morning when Catherine opened it, looking for something else. Moved through the kitchen doing the small invisible things that kept everything moving forward, and did it with the ease of someone who was not performing helpfulness, but was simply there. Present. Useful in the way that good presence is useful. At one point, Catherine reached past him for the lid to the saucepot, and he was already holding it, because he'd seen her start to turn and had picked it up 2 seconds earlier. She took it from him, didn't say anything, looked at him for a half second that was completely, deliberately, illegally unguarded. Dinner was good, not complicated, just good. The pasta was right, the bread was warm. Brandon ate 2.5 portions and complimented the sauce twice.
which was Brandon's version of enthusiasm. Ashley ate and talked about a paper she was writing for an environmental policy class. Something about urban heat islands and infrastructure design, and the way she talked about it, with the specific animation, with the specific of someone who cared genuinely about the thing they were explaining, was exactly how Catherine talked about her company's programs. Before she remembered she was supposed to be managing her composure around strangers. Stephen noticed that too. The presentation was at the community room of the local library 10 minutes away, a small venue with decent acoustics and about 40 seats that filled in steadily with parents and siblings and a few grandparents who had driven in from elsewhere. Ashley was the sixth presenter. She sat in the front row with her folder, reorganizing her notes one final time, and then closing the folder and putting it under her chair and sitting up straight with the settled calm of someone who has decided they're ready and is done second-guessing it. Brandon leaned over from the seat beside her. "You know it, I know it. So stop thinking about whether you know it." She looked at him. "I wasn't thinking about whether I know it. You were doing the face." "I don't have a face." "You have a face. It's similar to your calculus's face except the stakes are higher. Please stop talking about my face." Stopping. He looked forward. "You've got this." A pause, then Ashley, quietly, not looking at him. "Thanks, Brandon. The first 5 presentations were fine. Competent. The kind of work students do when they understand the assignment and have done the research and are performing the result." Ashley walked to the front of the room for the 6th slot and unrolled the map she'd made, not printed, not projected on a screen, actually drawn by hand. Every line and symbol placed deliberately, the whole geography of it built from the ground up by someone who wanted to understand the terrain before she tried to explain it to anyone else. She talked about the Underground Railroad, not the broad version, not the survey. She talked about the infrastructure of it, the specific, unglamorous, essential infrastructure that made the whole thing possible. The people who owned farmhouses along the route, the barns with false floors, the church basements with hidden rooms that were built by local carpenters who kept no records of what they'd built or why. She talked about what those people had in common, which was they were ordinary. They were not generals or politicians or people with platforms. They were people with houses and properties and skills who understood that the right thing required them to use what they had in the most useful possible way, and who did it without expecting anyone to write it down. They left behind not documents but structures, Ashley said, her voice carrying cleanly in the quiet room. Barns, root cellars, and fence lines, property borders that marked safe passage, that guided people from one station to the next along routes that had no official map, because an official map would have been a death sentence. She paused. The fence mattered as much as anything else along the route. Not because it was grand, not because it announced itself, because it was there, because someone built it to a standard and maintained it and made sure it held. And because of that, it served a purpose its builder may never have known it served. Stephen went very still. He heard the fence in that. He heard the 3 days of work along the east property line. He heard Linda saying, "You show up." He heard Brandon on the porch steps with 2 cans of water, and nothing to say, because nothing needed to be said. He heard 4 months of insurance appeals and every form and every denial and the parking lot afterward. He heard Catherine gripping the post with both hands because she'd decided to do it completely. He heard George Harris at 73 years old saying, "Don't be tired yet." He heard his own life in it, the part that had never been in any official record, the part that had been building and holding and maintaining things without announcement for 41 years. Ashley looked up from the map, found his eyes across the room, held them for exactly 1 second, then looked at the room, the whole room, and said, "The people who built and maintained those fence lines are, in almost every case, unknown to history. Their names are not in the books. Their work is not commemorated. But the roots survived because of them. People survived because of them." She paused. "I think that's worth saying clearly." The room applauded. Brandon, beside Stephen, said very quietly, She's really good. Stephen's voice, when it came, different. He cleared his throat, left it there. Catherine, on his other side, shifted almost nothing, almost imperceptible, so that her shoulder was just barely against his. He didn't move away. She didn't move away. And that small, specific warmth of two people choosing not to create distance was its own kind of answer to a question neither of them had asked out loud yet. They drove back to the house in 2 cars. Brandon and Ashley ahead, the two of them apparently mid-argument about something related to the presentation. Stephen could see Ashley gesturing through the rear window of Brandon's car and Brandon doing the nod. That meant he was listening hard enough to be building a counter-argument. He drove behind them in his truck with Catherine in the passenger seat, and neither of them said anything for the whole 10 minutes. And the silence was not uncomfortable. It was, actually, the most comfortable 10 minutes Stephen had experienced in recent memory, which he noted, which he filed. At the house, Ashley went inside immediately. I need to decompress. Being brilliant is exhausting. And Brandon followed, because the argument was apparently not finished. Stephen and Catherine sat in the driveway for 30 seconds, in the truck, with the engine off before she got out, and even those 30 seconds had something in them, like the pause before a sentence that's been thought about. Inside, the kids were in the kitchen, Ashley at the counter, Brandon at the table, the argument continuing in the low-key, mutually engaged way that meant it wasn't really an argument anymore, just two people talking about something they both found interesting in the particular key. That sounds like disagreement from the outside. Catherine made tea, made 2 cups, the same as the coffee on the second morning, without asking, without ceremony, just making the second cup, because it was the right thing to do. She handed him his. He took it. They sat at the table, and the conversation happened around them, and between them, and sometimes included them, and sometimes didn't. And the whole thing had the quality of something that had been building for 10 days, and had arrived, without any particular dramatic announcement, at exactly where it was supposed to be. Ashley, somewhere between the tea and the point where Brandon started explaining something about the parallels between railroad infrastructure and modern logistics networks. You were really still during the presentation. Stephen looked at her. I was listening. You were more still than listening still. You were, she considered, like something landed. He held her gaze. Something did. Ashley looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at her mother, then back at Stephen, with the expression of someone who has just confirmed the thing they suspected, but wanted to see confirmed anyway. She wrote that section about the fence lines after Saturday. After the last day on the fence. She was talking to both of them now, or to the room. She called me from the library at 9 at night and said she'd figured out what the presentation was actually about. Catherine, quietly, from her end of the table, I didn't tell her that. You didn't have to. Ashley picked up her tea. I'm her daughter. Brandon looked at Stephen with an expression that said, I'm staying out of this, and also I understand everything that is happening, and also this is going extremely well. Stephen received the expression and said nothing, because nothing was needed. Later, when the kitchen had cleared, Ashley retreating to her room with her notes and her map, which she'd re-rolled carefully and carried upstairs under her arm, like something she'd decided to keep. Brandon did the dishes without being asked, which was a thing he'd done since age 11 and which Stephen had never stopped noticing. Then Brandon said he was going to read for a while and disappeared down the hall, with the tact of a 19-year-old who had decided to be elsewhere at the right time, which left the kitchen with 2 people in it. Catherine refilled both mugs without asking, sat back down. The house was quiet. Outside, the night had gone fully cold, and the kitchen was warm against it, and there was the particular sense of an evening that has reached its natural final stage, not ending, just settling. She talked about the shareholder meeting for a while, what George Harris had said when he'd called Saturday afternoon. The 2 additional shareholders who would attend Tuesday, the documentation she'd spent the weekend assembling, revenue trajectory, client retention, program outcomes, the 3-year plan the board wanted to dismantle. She said, I'd been so close to the crisis that I forgot what the whole picture actually looked like. I had to step back far enough to see it. He said, that's what happens when you're inside something. You start seeing what's damaged and lose sight of what's holding. She looked at him. You do that thing. What thing? Where you say something that applies to more than one situation at the same time. She wrapped both hands around her mug, not in the desperate way of the first morning, but in the easy way of someone warm and tired and not requiring anything to be different. I've noticed it since Tuesday. Occupational habit, he said. Is it, though? He thought about that, honestly, I don't know. Maybe it's just things connect. You see enough fences. You start to see what fences have in common with other things. He looked at his tea. Or maybe I just worked on a lot of different kinds of problems, and the same things kept coming up. What keeps coming up? That the outside and the inside are almost never the same. He set the mug down, and that most of the damage starts where you can't see it. Catherine was quiet for a moment. Linda must have understood that about you. He looked at her. I'm not trying to, she stopped. Started again, more carefully. I mean that she must have known what she had. With you. Most people don't have someone who looks that carefully. He thought about Linda, about the things she'd said, and the things she'd seen in him that he hadn't seen yet himself. She told me once that the best and most frustrating thing about me was that I showed up before people knew they needed me and stayed after everyone else had left. He paused. I didn't know what to do with that when she said it. I thought she was just being generous. Catherine shook her head slowly. She was being accurate. The kitchen was quiet, genuinely quiet, the kind that has no edge to it. Then Stephen said, Lily asked me once if I was ever scared. Catherine looked at him. Ashley. Sorry, Ashley. He caught himself, registered the mistake, kept going. She asked me if I was ever scared. A few days ago, out at the fence, he held the mug with both hands. I told her yes. Ever you scared of? That I'm not enough. That the work isn't enough. That I've been so focused on surviving that I missed something important along the way. He paused. And lately, something new. He looked at her. She looked back. That I'll talk myself out of something real, he said. Because it arrived in an unexpected package. Because I wasn't looking for it and don't know the protocol. The kitchen air was very still. Catherine set her mug down. Slowly. Placed it with the precision of someone doing something deliberate that they want to be precise. She put her hand flat on the table between them. Not reaching toward him. Just placing it there. Open, he looked at her hand, at the concrete dust that was long gone but that he remembered, at the hands that had gripped the post with both palms. Because she'd decided to do the thing completely. He put his hand over hers. She didn't pull back. He didn't pull back. They sat like that in the warm kitchen, in the quiet house, with tea going lukewarm, and two kids down the hall and 11 days of something building between them that had been calling itself something else the whole time. I have the meeting Tuesday, she said finally. I know, and the formal reconciliation with the board after. If the vote holds, it'll hold. She looked at him. You don't know that. I know what you built, and I know what you spent the weekend building. He turned his hand over, held hers properly. Real things survive when someone fights for them hard enough and long enough. You've been fighting longer than they have. She was quiet. Her thumb moved slightly against his hand, not a gesture, just a movement, the unconscious kind. This is going to be complicated, she said. I know. Ashley has opinions about everything. Brandon corrects people's math in public. She stopped. Eric is going to be Eric for a while. That's his choice to make. I know. She looked at their hands. I'm not asking you to manage any of that. I know what you're asking. She looked up. What am I asking? He looked at her steadily. You're asking if I'm going to be here. Not just for the fence, not just for Tuesday. He paused. You're asking if the thing I said about setting deep instead of fast applies to. He stopped, looked for the right word. This. She waited. Yes, he said. It applies to this. She held his gaze for a long moment. Something moved through her face, not relief exactly, though there was relief in it. More like arrival. The specific quality of a person who has been moving towards something for a while and has finally stopped moving because they're there. The back door, the November air, the last fence check before the end. That came 3 weeks later, but this was the moment that made it possible. She squeezed his hand once, he squeezed back, and neither of them said anything for a while, because neither of them needed to, and because the quiet between two people who are telling the truth requires no translation. Brandon appeared in the kitchen doorway at 9:45, in socks and the sweatshirt he wore when he was winding down, carrying his empty water glass with the expression of a person who has timed his reappearance with excessive precision. "Just getting water," he said with complete transparency and zero convincing innocence. "Get your water." Brandon got his water. On the way back out of the kitchen, he paused and looked at both of them at the table, and looked at their hands, and looked at the ceiling with the particular expression of a 19-year-old containing a reaction he had decided not to have out loud. Then he went back down the hallway, from somewhere in the direction of Ashley's room, faint and through a closed door, the sound of the two of them starting another argument about something. Logistics this time, maybe. Or calculus. Or whether the Underground Railroad had more in common with modern supply chains than most historians acknowledged, which had apparently been a live topic since Tuesday. Catherine laughed. Not the professional laugh, not the controlled version or the composed version, the real one, small and sudden and completely unguarded, arriving without warning and changing everything in her face, and then settling into a smile that had no agenda. It was the best thing Stephen had heard in this house, maybe in considerably longer. He smiled back, the steady kind, the kind that didn't need to explain itself. The shareholder vote happened on a Thursday. Stephen was at the Ridgefield deck job, mid-morning, when his phone rang, and Catherine's name came up, and his hand moved to answer it faster than he decided to. "George has the votes." Her voice had a texture he hadn't heard before, like something that had been held at enormous pressure for 11 days, had just been given permission to release. Not dramatically. Just the pressure wasn't there anymore. 6 committed. The board needs a supermajority. They don't have it. The vote is postponed pending further review. Stephen set down the nail. "Gun. That's a win. That's a win." Her voice broke on the second word. Just the edge of it. Just the clean, specific break of something that had been true for a long time and had just been allowed to be said. He stood in the middle of the Ridgefield deck and didn't say anything for a moment. Because she didn't need him to say anything. She needed to be on the other end of a line, held by someone who understood what 11 days of that had cost, and who could stand there and hold it while she let herself feel the size of what had just happened. "I keep waiting to feel relieved," she said. "What do you feel?" "Tired." A breath. "Genuinely, completely tired. Like I've been holding myself at attention for so long that my body forgot. It was doing it, and now it's remembering." "That's the right feeling," he said. "That's what it feels like when it's real." She made a sound, small, unscripted. "How do you know?" "Because when the insurance company finally paid, I sat in the parking lot for 40 minutes and could not figure out what to do with my hands when they weren't fighting something. I just sat there." He looked at the deck joists in front of him. "Then I drove home, made dinner, put Brandon to bed. And that night I cried for about 20 minutes and then I was done. Completely done. Because I'd held it long enough and I didn't have to anymore." The line was quiet. "Come to dinner tonight," Catherine said. "Both of you. I want to tell Ashley in person. And I want." She stopped. Chose the next word carefully. "I want you there when I do. We'll be there at 6:28. 6:30, she said. "I need a shower and at least 20 minutes to stop shaking." He went back to the deck. He worked through the afternoon with the particular clarity that arrives after something important has been resolved. Not the absence of thought, but the presence of a different kind, cleaner and less cluttered. He measured twice, cut once. He checked spans. He did the work required. At 4:30, he texted Brandon, "Dinner at Whitfield Hollow tonight. Dress like you care." "Brandon, I always dress like I care." "Stephen, I've seen your Thursday wardrobe." "Brandon, what time?" They arrived at 6:28. The porch light was on. Ashley opened the door before they knocked. which was becoming simply what she did, and she took one look at her mother standing in the kitchen doorway. The specific brightness in Catherine's eyes, the careful way she was holding her expression together, and Ashley said, "You won." Catherine started to say, "We're having dinner first." Ashley crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and put her arms around her mother's neck and held on. And Catherine held back with the complete full-body presence of a woman who had been carrying something enormous and was finally being held instead of holding. Neither of them said anything. Neither of them needed to. Stephen looked at Brandon. Brandon looked at Stephen. They found something to do near the counter involving looking at the fruit bowl very carefully. After a while, Ashley pulled back, wiped her face once, quickly, with the efficiency of someone who has acknowledged the moment and is ready to move through it. "Okay," she said. "Dinner. Dinner," Catherine agreed. And her voice was the most ordinary it had sounded in 11 days. No performance, no precision, just regular human and completely enough. The 4 of them made dinner together the way they had 2 weeks ago. Except more naturally, this time the version of a thing the second time, when everyone has stopped deciding how to do it and just does it. Catherine at the stove because she was particular about sauce. Ashley cutting bread. Brandon setting the table with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been raised to contribute without announcement. Stephen filling glasses and finding the lid and being useful in the small, continuous ways that kept the whole operation moving. At one point, Brandon looked at Catherine and said, with no preamble whatsoever, "My mom built things too. My dad says she would have kept building them if she'd had more time." He said he said everything that really mattered without flinching, with the particular clarity of a kid who had decided that the grief was part of his story and not something to hide around. "I think it's important when people fight for what they build." The table went quiet. Catherine looked at Brandon for a moment, with the specific openness that people have when a 19-year-old says something that costs them nothing to say and lands with the weight of something that costs everything. "So do I," she said. Brandon nodded once, went back to his pasta. Case made. Point delivered. Topic closed because he'd said the thing he meant to say and didn't need to underline it. Ashley looked at him, then at the ceiling, then at nobody. "He does that. It's a thing he does." "It's not a thing I do," Brandon said. "Things I do would imply I plan it." "Even worse," Ashley said. "It's just natural. I'm not sure that's a compliment." "It is," Ashley said. "Don't ruin it." He didn't ruin it. He had more pasta instead. Eric King called Ashley on a Sunday in November. Not a scheduled call. Not coordinated through Catherine. Just a call. At 2 in the afternoon that Ashley answered, standing in the kitchen, and which lasted 45 minutes, and during which she walked from the kitchen to the back steps, to the fence line, and back again, and at some point in the middle of it started laughing at something. And that laugh through the kitchen window was the thing that made Catherine put down the cup she was holding, and press both hands flat on the counter, and breathe through the complicated calculus of watching your daughter get something she's needed for a long time, from someone who is also the source of considerable damage. She told Stephen about it that evening on the phone, that she'd stayed inside because it wasn't her conversation, that she'd made tea and drunk it standing up, that when Ashley came back inside, she didn't say much, except that her dad had called and they'd talked and she had homework to do, but that her face was different, less braced, more open. She told him, Stephen said. She told him. Catherine was quiet for a moment. "The thing she told you, that she needed a father, not an arrangement." She said she told him directly, that those were 2 different things. Another pause. He listened. "Good. Is it good that it took this long?" Stephen thought about that. "It's good that it happened. The timing is what it is." He paused. People hear things when they're ready to hear them. You can say the right thing to the wrong version of someone, and it bounces off. Sometimes you have to wait for the version that can receive it. "Did you know that calling him would work?" "No," he said honestly. "I thought it might land. I thought it was worth landing." A pause. "I also thought I had no right to make that call, and I made it anyway, which I've been thinking about." "I know," Catherine said. "I was wrong to do it without asking. I know that too. A pause. I've thought about it. Whether I'm glad you did it, she was quiet. I am, which doesn't mean you were right. No, he agreed. It doesn't. Both things are true. He paused. Both things are true. The first real storm came on a Friday night in November. Stephen was at the house a Friday night, which had become simply where he was on Friday nights in the way that things become where you are when you've stopped deciding and started being. Brandon was at school. Ashley was upstairs with her laptop. Catherine had been on a call with her attorney about the formal reconciliation with the board, which was going to require her to sit across from the people who'd tried to take what she'd built and negotiate the terms of their failure, and which she was approaching with the specific focused composure of someone who has been through enough to know that the aftermath of winning is still work. The storm came up fast. The wind first, moving through the trees along the east property line with a sound like something deciding. Then the rain, heavy and cold, not the gradual kind but the immediate kind, the kind that goes from nothing to serious in under 2 minutes. Ashley called down from upstairs, the fence. Not a question, just her first thought. Stephen was already on his feet, already at the hook by the door where his jacket lived. Catherine was right behind him, her jacket, her boots. Not a moment's hesitation, not a word about whether it was necessary or whether he could just go alone. They went out together into the dark and the rain. The yard was louder than usual. Wind in the maples, rain against the mesh. Stephen moved along the fence line with his flashlight, the same systematic check he always did post by post, starting at the corner anchor, pressing his palm against the base of each one, feeling for the thing he'd been trained by years of practice to feel for. The give that meant something was wrong underneath. Nothing gave. Every post held exactly where he'd set it. The concrete had done what concrete does. When it's mixed right and poured right and given the time it needs, it had become simply part of the ground. The mesh was tight. The rain was hitting it at an angle from the north, and the wind was pushing it, and it was absorbing all of that, without complaint, without drama, without any visible sign that it was under any pressure at all. He checked the gate last, the hinges he'd replaced. The latch, the swing of it in the gust not yielding, just acknowledging, touching the latch and bouncing back, exactly what correctly balanced hardware does. It's holding, he said. Catherine, beside him in the rain, you built it to hold. That was the job. She was wet. They both were. This was not a mild rain. This was the real thing, November deciding to announce itself properly. Her hair was flattened against her face. She was not performing anything. Not composure. Not capability. Not the version she assembled every morning before the world arrived. She was just standing in the rain in her yard next to the fence that ran true and solid along the property line, with the specific quality of a person who has stopped bracing. She put her hand on the last post. He put his over hers, cold metal underneath, both of their hands on top of it, the rain on their skin, the post not moving. Not just the fence, she said. He looked at her, in the dark and the rain, with the storm moving through the trees, and the light from the kitchen window, cutting a yellow rectangle across the wet grass. He looked at her the way he'd learned to look things from the base up, honestly, without deciding what he thought before he knew what he was looking at. She was looking back at him the same way. No, he said. Not just the fence. She leaned into him. He put his arm around her. They stood at the fence line in the rain, and it was cold, and it was wet, and it was completely, unequivocally real. And neither of them moved toward the house. Through the lit kitchen window, Brandon and Ashley were visible at the table. Ashley gesturing with a pencil at something on paper. Brandon with his head at the angle he used when he was actually listening rather than preparing to argue. Both of them in the warm light. Both of them there. Stephen looked at that window for a long moment. He thought about Linda. About what she'd said about him showing up. About how he'd been embarrassed by that for years, by the smallness of it. The way it never made any record. The way the world organized its recognition around a different set of skills entirely. He thought about 4 months of forms and appeals and the parking lot afterward and the 40 minutes of not knowing what to do with his hands. He thought about a sticker on a thermos that he'd never taken off. He thought about a 19-year-old boy who brought 2 cans of water to a driveway and sat down and said nothing because nothing needed to be said. He thought about the 3rd post, the one that looked solid, the one that gave. He thought about the things that look solid that aren't, and the things that look damaged, that aren't as broken as they seem, and the whole skill of it, the whole discipline, and the whole grace of it being the ability to tell the difference. Catherine pulled him slightly toward the house. He went inside. Ashley looked up from the table. Fence. Holding, Stephen said. Of course it is, Brandon said, without looking up from whatever Ashley had been showing him. He built it. Ashley looked at Brandon, then at Stephen, then at Catherine, who was pulling her wet hair back and laughing slightly at something, at the rain, at the evening, at all of it, the specific laugh of someone who has stopped managing the moment and started living in it. Catherine made tea. 2 cups. Set his on the table in front of him without asking. He took it, because in this story, he took, and whatever the gesture required in the way of acknowledgement, it didn't require words, because they had built enough between them by now that some things didn't need narration. They had built it the way he built everything, one honest piece at a time, tested at each joint, checked from the base up, made to sustain the actual load rather than the theoretical one. He sat down at the table. Brandon was explaining something with his hands, the way he explained things that genuinely excited him. Ashley was listening with the fond impatience of someone who had already decided she liked this person and was mildly annoyed about how much. Catherine was watching them both with the open, undefended face of a woman who had stopped bracing for things to be taken from her. Stephen looked around the table. Some men built fences. Some men built companies. Some men built the invisible infrastructure of other people's lives and never got a line in the official record, never got the credit that the loudest voice in the room collected as a matter of physics. Stephen Taylor was that kind of man. 41 years of it, 4 years of it alone. And then 3 days of a fence job in Whitfield Hollow that became something else entirely before he'd finished reading the 1st post. He picked up his tea. The fence held through the whole winter. So did everything else.